Insight is really great about testing our own employees and sending out those potentially spammy emails. Have you ever clicked on a
One
fake
time. They got me one time.
Oh, and I still gave you the title.
I had an almost perfect record.
Welcome to the Tech Journal podcast, our companion interview series for the Tech Journal magazine, where business and IT leaders share their experiences to help you accelerate transformation by unlocking the power of people and technology. I'm your host, Jillian Viner. Today's conversation is with Jeremy Nelson, Chief Information Security Officer for Insight North America. With 30 years of experience in IT, Jeremy has navigated numerous incident and response events. And drawing from his extensive experience, Jeremy highlights the significant distinctions between organizations with a robust plan and those without one. He emphasizes the potential impacts on both the business and the individuals tasked to protect it. Jeremy also shares why getting to a plan of action remains a challenge for CISOs and provides practical advice to prepare for inevitability. Here's my conversation with Jeremy. So you're a CISO now. I don't think you were a CISO last time we talked.
No, that happened 6 weeks ago.
That's wild.
It really was.
And I'll be honest with you, I was scoping out your LinkedIn profile.
Oh, yeah?
Because I was like, what was his role before? I can't remember now. And I was like, wait a minute. There's like no security titles in here.
No.
You've been in IT forever.
I've been in IT forever.
But how did you get into a security position?
So if you think back, I look back at my whole career, right? And security's always been there. It's something that fascinated me. So I actually relate it back to when I was going through my Microsoft certification way back in the day. I remember the very first time as part of the training. So I signed up and I went through instructor-led training. And part of the material was you launched a packet capture. So you literally launched NetMonitor and you ran a packet capture and you saw exactly what was flowing over the network. And I remember that was this big inflection point for me where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is how the internet works. The internet to me was still very, very new. And it was just this nebulous thing of I clicked on stuff and I got the content I was looking for, but I didn't really know how did stuff really transact. I knew how to write HTML code, all that good stuff. And then I saw the frames. I saw what was actually going beyond.
I feel like you saw the Matrix.
It really was, right? It's like the green stuff floating down. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm Neo. I see it. And but then you go through and you start decoding it and just seeing all the different headers and components and seeing the actual data and the payload. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And something triggered inside of me. And so even though I started off in the system administration space, I'm like, I got to get into networking. This needs to be my world. And so eventually I found my way in. And kind of just through that journey, security was just always something that fascinated me. It was it was a game, it was a puzzle, right? And it's when you're playing with an unknown adversary and there's just kind of constant arms race on who can do better than the other one. And so even when I was in my system administration, I learned to do penetration testing and things like that. And then I kind of evolved into the networking space where firewalls were the perimeter of the day. That's how you defined your security perimeter, was through firewalls. And so kind of learning how to do access policies and best practices and management and just kind of really digging deep into that. And I've been so fortunate and blessed to have been given opportunities to really get into every facet of IT. So I've done system administration work, I've done networking, I've done storage, I've done virtualization, I've done software development. And so what ends up coming together in this CISO role, and we've seen this really kind of have tremendous value as I've supported various organizations through incident response over the past few months, is that really having that full breadth of understanding of how the various different components function at some level, how they integrate together, and then how security plays a role in all of that, kind of created this space for me to kind of become more of a dedicated security subject matter expert and find myself in the CISO role. So, wow, that was a really long explanation. Jillian, I'm sorry.
That's
you probably
okay.
weren't expecting something like that.
That was great, but I still have one burning question.
Yes.
Insight is really great about testing our own employees and sending out those potentially spammy emails. Have you ever clicked on a
one
fake...
time. They got me one time.
Oh, and I still gave you the title.
I had an almost perfect record. And here's what they got me. Okay, this shows how good they are about very targeted in their phishing campaigns. And so In my role as a services leader, I'm responsible for a lot of contracts for the work that we do within services delivery. And so they'll come to me and I'll sign them. And they come through DocuSign for the most part. And they did a great job of creating a very authentic looking DocuSign request. And it was towards the end of the month, the end of the quarter. And so my brain is in like, okay, I got to get this paperwork out, And my guard was down and the email came in and I hovered over it and I clicked it. And just as I was clicking it, I saw the little like thing pop up and I could just, that brief fraction of a second, I'm like,
motion.
That's not DocuSign. And I'm like, they got me. And it popped up, and sure enough, I get the message of this was a test, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden I get the email notifying me that I have now been registered for cybersecurity best practices training. It was one of the most humiliating moments of my time here at Insight, if I can be honest.
But you learned from it.
I did learn from it. And guess what? They've never gotten me since.
That's so smart, though. They knew, what you'd be typically going through, when you'd be a stressful time, your guard would be down.
But that's what threat actors do, right? They know that. And when we think about even what we're experiencing right now, when you think about the number of cybersecurity events that are happening, when we see like something pop up in the news, a lot of what we've been seeing is it's these threat actors that are taking advantage of points of weakness, like when people's guards are down or where there's intrinsic trust happening because it's convenient, right? Because there's some type of a demand on somebody's time, schedule, and attention that forces them maybe not to be quite as vigilant as they normally would be. M&A, probably one of the best examples, is it is so easy to slipstream in to the various different integration efforts that are happening within an organization during a merger and acquisition or even divestiture. Divestiture, I think, is going to start to spin up to be another area where we have to be extra cautious as we're seeing the transition of these organizations and kind of how they form into separate entities, and making sure that we continue to think about like what are the different entry points that we're creating for threat actors to come in and kind of get us while our guard's down, take advantage of what they know happens during these circumstances and situations, and being able to get in. Because at the end of the day, it really tends to be people. People are one of the most vulnerable areas of an organization. So yes, we absolutely see where people brute force their way in through technical means and gaps and vulnerabilities that exist within different technology platforms, but it really comes down to people. If you can trick a person, because at the end of the day, in order for you to do your job, you have to have access to data applications, right? You have to be able to connect and be able to function. And so it's way easier for me to trick you than it is for me to find some obscure technology gap and kind of forcibly get my way in. Now there's different types of threat actors and the way that they get in, what their motivations and objectives are. So those tend to weigh on how they tend to enter into an organization. But especially when we're seeing, ransomware and some of the things that are very, very prevalent today, it's the people.
It's the people. And it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
It's when.
That's widely understood.
Yep.
Given that, I don't take a downer here, but you've been in this space for a long time. How many incidents?
Are you calling me old? Is that the downer?
Not at all. Seasoned, I think, is the appropriate expression. How many times have you been involved in an incident response?
A lot. As I think about over the course of my career, closing in on 20 incident responses. But I'll tell you, what I've experienced over the past 10 months it's over doubled what I've experienced in my career.
I'm going to ask you a lot more about that. But first, of all of those incidents, how many of them had an incident and response plan in place?
That's a good question. If I were to kind of statistically put it, I would say it's probably over half. Because if you think about just traditional organizational governance, it's a checkbox, right? Like you have to have some type of incident response, disaster recovery, business continuity plan, right? So it's just through the course of conducting business, you're going to have something like that, especially once your organization gets to a certain size. And so a lot of companies that I work with have one. It's the quality and the age that tends to be a problem. So some of the organizations that I've supported even very recently have had plans, and they were actually very robust plans. But they'd never been updated. Some of them were upwards of a decade old. And so they'd just never gone back and revisited it. So it really addressed systems and processes and procedures that were no longer relevant. It actually called out individuals who are no longer with the company as far as like communication chains and things of that nature.
What's the right cadence then for updating that?
So it's going to sound excessive, but usually you want to do it on the high end twice a year is usually what we see, because a lot is happening. When you think about the rate of change that we're seeing within IT these days, no system stays relevant really for much more than 6 months, especially with the incumbency of generative AI and what that's doing to a lot of the different processes and systems that we're using today. It's really driving I think, I'm trying to remember who said it, but 100 years worth of innovation happening within this brief period of time, right? And so that's really being impacted and felt throughout the entirety of the IT organizations that we support. And so, when you think about 6 months to go back, make sure that, okay, is this still the process and procedure that we have for data protection? Is this still in place? Have there been any changes made to that? What about the people responsible? Have we made organizational changes that mean that we need to reach out to different people when an incident occurs, and we want to be able to get the right resources involved as quickly as possible? What about our cybersecurity insurer? Is that the same? What's the policy that we currently have in place? What are the limits on that policy? What about legal? Do we have internal counsel? Have we transitioned to external counsel? Is it the same external counsel that we had before? And then coming back and practicing. That's the big one. So even if you revisit it on a 6-month basis and make sure that documentation-wise it's up to date, if you're not practicing, it's just like anything, right? A sport or a video game or anything, you have to practice. And if you're not going through and developing that muscle memory and bringing the people together that are actually going to be responsible for executing that plan at the time of crisis, when you're not in crisis, it's going to be exponentially worse when you are in the middle of like watching all of your IT systems melt down and you're thinking about the longevity and survivability of your company.
So give me a glimpse into what that looks like. And we'll change the names of people to protect the innocent, but take me to a moment when you got that phone call that something's happened. What happens?
So usually the first thing that we do is we want to do some level of initial triage. So the first thing is the phone call comes in, and one of the first folks that we get engaged from our team is someone that we call an incident commander. So this is somebody very seasoned cybersecurity professional who's gone through these incidents before. I think one of the most important things is that they are a calm voice, right? That there is a certain level of separation from the emotion and from everything else that's associated with, watching your organization go through this, watching the systems that you've loved and architected and built and operated and cared for so long. And so someone who can come in and be just very, very objective, who's gone through these before, knows the process and procedure and methodologies for being able to first identify. You want to go to contain, eradicate, and then recover, right? Like that's kind of like the sequence that you want to go through. And so you need somebody who can come in and be calm and be somebody that says, okay, we got this, and walk them through a very standardized kind of methodology and checklist that we have. We just run through and we just start asking questions about, different types of entry points. What are the behaviors that you're seeing? I'll just throw this out there. Have you seen a ransom note yet, right? And just really kind of walking the chain of where are we at right now? Like, what do we know? And then it's a matter of engaging forensic subject matter experts. Now we're starting to bring in technical people. Now, again, it's all coordinated by an incident commander.
Is that you?
I've done it before. It is a rough job. You really do not get a lot of sleep. But we've actually got a whole series of teammates here at Insight that are seasoned and exceptional incident commanders. So in my new role, I get spread pretty thin, and so it's hard for me to dedicate myself solely to those to that role now. But if necessary, absolutely, I'm
sounds
more
like
than
a
happy.
role that would age you. I mean
It
that
does.
well, but that's
exactly.
a hard task,
It
especially
really
as you
does.
said. Like sort of your first requirement is to have that calm presence and just.
Yep.
Here's what we need to do.
Like, we got this.
Yeah.
You've got the right people involved. We've been here. We can get you through this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now it's just a matter of let's figure out what you got. Let's figure out what we're up against, and let's start putting together a plan. And then while you're putting together the plan and kind of wrapping our arms around the architecture, we start bringing in those technical folks who really start doing the forensic details. They try and identify the attack chain. They try and understand exactly where the threat actor has been, where are they going, what are the indicators of compromise that they're using, and then really trying to focus in on containing them where they're at, not letting them spread any further, eradicating and removing their abilities to get into the environment, and then working through backing out whatever it is that they were able to accomplish. So it sounds really simple when I say it like that, but lots of times we're talking like weeks, sometimes months.
Of very little sleep and high stress.
Very little sleep, high stress. Now, the good news is that usually the very little sleep is the first few days because you're just running 24/7. You're trying to get a team amassed. But that's one of the most important parts, if I can be honest. When we get involved in these incident responses, a lot of conversations that I've had with other IT leaders is that you can't forget about the human component of all of this, is that the natural reaction of people is just throw their bodies at the bus, right? Like they just throw their bodies at it and they're going to do whatever it takes to recover from this situation. And what ends up happening is that if your incident response plan doesn't include a way for you to rapidly increase the talent pool that you have to help come in and do the technical work necessary to recover, you are going to burn out your most valuable human resources. And then what ends up happening is that usually you come out the other end of it, and depending on your culture, you'll either have one or two outcomes. You'll either have a team that's stronger, more committed and hungry to building up like this next generation architecture and environment to support the company, or you have people who don't feel appreciated, who feel burned out, and now your most valuable technical assets are looking to exit the business. So there's risk on lots of different fronts there through this incident response.
What is at the forefront of it? I imagine that the whole environment is a lot more stressful without that plan in place, or with maybe a plan that's wildly outdated. Paint the picture when there is a plan in place. Maybe it was updated 6 months ago. How does that, what's the outcome of that?
Yeah, it's usually much better. In fact, lots of times they'll bring us in just as a backup, just to kind of make sure that they're running through their own plan. In fact, in some instances, we've helped them develop the plan. And so when we get involved, like now we're just kind of coming in to oversee the execution of something that we've co-developed. Much smoother. Typically what ends up happening is the overall affected zone is much smaller, much tighter. We have a much better way of identifying exactly where where the threat actor has been, what they're doing. We can kind of contain them quickly, get them out of the system, and then we usually have recovery plans and tools in place that help us get back to a point of impact or point of incident much, much faster. So you're talking like maybe a couple of days. Sometimes, depending on, again, size and scope, may not even recognize that it happened.
Wow.
Yeah, so company-wide. So we, proactive detection, containment, eradication, and then point-in-time recovery.
It's very likely that most of your employees will have no idea that your business has been impacted.
Yeah, those are the best. I'm going to be honest, we don't see many of those, right? In fact, we usually hear about them afterwards, but even then, it's pretty few and far between. It takes a level of maturity on your cybersecurity program that just a lot of organizations it's tough because you have to invest, not just cost, but there's people, time, process, practicing. It's you have to kind of remove yourself from the business, the day-to-day operations of the business, in order to be able to focus on that. And it's difficult. It's difficult to find that prioritization. And so,
yeah, that's what I'm wondering, because we know, again, cybersecurity attacks are on the rise. It's a matter of not if, but when. But it seems like organizations are still struggling to make incident response a priority. Even though we know the consequences, it's usually millions, if not billions, of financial and losses or reputational damages. You mentioned the impacts to just the team that are saddled with, correcting the situations. How much of it, and you indicated, it's just an investment of time, resources up front to make sure that you have that plan in place. So why is this a challenge? Why are CISOs struggling to make this a priority for the business?
I'm going to throw it out there. And this didn't even come from me, so I don't want to take full credit for this. This came from another CISO that I was working with, but you'll understand why here in just a second. And it really boils down to the ones who struggle haven't gone through an incident yet. The ones who get all the investment and all the time that they need have recently gone through an incident. They've never experienced it. That's really what it comes down to, is that the CISO knows because they've been in that seat. It's their responsibility to understand what goes on and the risk and the pain of an incident. But lots of times, some of the other surrounding executives don't necessarily know that pain yet. And it just feels like a little bit like the CISO kind of gets a reputation of being chicken little a little bit, right? Of the sky is falling, always asking for money, always asking for time, always asking for investment for something that's never happened before. And so it's really difficult for that prioritization to take hold and to be able to get that investment that they're looking for. Whereas you go to a CISO, to a company that's recently been through an incident, and they come back and they say like, okay, here's my plan, here's what we need to do, here's what we need to invest, and it's an open checkbook. The senior executives have now gone through it. They see what the risk is to the business. They don't want to ever go through that again. And so the partnership, the elevated status of the CISO is really something that helps to drive the business forward and isn't just like Chicken Little running around screaming that the sky is falling.
That feels like a very hard lesson to learn firsthand.
Terrible way to learn firsthand. I would love for anyone within the sound of my voice, if you're a senior executive and you're thinking that your CISO is Chicken Little, trust me, it's way better to invest in him now than waiting for the incident to occur and then realizing after the fact that maybe that investment would have been a better way to sustain your business.
So artificial intelligence is coming up in conversation everywhere. We talk about a lot how our AI can assist cybersecurity and cybersecurity teams. And business leaders, board directors, like they're all interested to understand what is an organization's AI, generative AI strategy. Is there maybe a sneaky way that a CISO can, I don't know, curtail the conversation or bring incident response along with the generative AI strategy so that it's a little bit sparkly and flashy? Like, is there a role for AI and generative AI in incident response?
100%. 100%. So when we think about generative AI through the lens of cybersecurity, right? So there's a number of different things that it brings to the table, right? So number one is that the most natural is that these generative AI models are all about ingesting tremendous amounts of data in order to be able to draw the correlations and be able to respond to prompts and things that get entered into them. And so the first one is obviously data security. So it's all about data classification, data permissions and things like that, right? So coming back to just, hey, how do I make sure that sensitive data isn't potentially getting linked into a model that somebody could ask and then be able to provide them with information that could be potentially harmful to us as an organization. The other one where we start to see it a lot is really around software development. So when you think about it, it's on both sides of the coin. You've got the good guys who are using it to try and write more secure code without to make up for maybe some of the gaps in some of the junior development or the structured software development organizations that we have, and trying to help bring generative AI to help us release more secure code. But on the opposite end, you got the bad guys who are out there actively using generative AI models to generate code that would be able to exploit gaps and things like that we see within the systems that we use day in and day out. And so there's this kind of leveraging the tools in the same way, but for obviously different means and different ends. And then last but not least is what it's really, really good at is taking the tremendous wealth of information that it's consumed across a lot of public different sources and helping to create material. So you're not starting from a blank sheet of paper. And so coming back to your question, I promise this is all coming full circle, is if you're at a starting point, right? Like say you're looking at incident response, you're like, I need a good incident response plan. The generative AI provides a wonderful foundation for you to go in and say like, hey, help me generate a incident response plan for this type of an organization that has these tools and these systems in it. And it'll give you at least a rough framework based off of data that it's been able to collect and amass over a variety of different public-facing sources. Now, again, that's not going to be perfect. It's going to give you, but it gives you at least a rough framework that you can start off with, and then working through how do I refine this and make this very tailored for my organization. And then again, coming back to the best way to do that, Practice, 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 practice. Work with an incident commander, somebody who's gone through this before in the past, and do tabletop exercises. Prove out that plan. Make sure that it works. Do simulations. That's really the best way that I think generative AI comes in when you're thinking about an incident response plan, is leveraging that and, where possible, incorporating it into the tools that you use for doing identification, detection, and response. So that way you enhance the overall security operations of your organization through leveraging generative AI that can look through the massive amounts of data that you would collect through some of your tooling and be able to give you more directed, intel on what's happening in your environment and recommended actions on how to stop it in its tracks.
I feel like there's a disclaimer in there. You're not just going to go out onto some public-facing generative AI tool and ask it.
Please don't. Please don't.
And of course, there's, it is pulling it's pulling in aggregate information that's available to it, but there's nothing like reaching out to someone who's been there before, actually step through the process.
Yep. Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's a great way of not starting from a blank sheet of paper.
Is there such thing as an incident response plan template?
There's a lot. Like, you can actually go out there, and there's quite a few that are published as far as like just general best practices on, first step, second step, third step. So it kind of walks you through like an overall framework for a template. But again, it's all going to be very tailored to the type of industry that you're in, the way that your organization is structured, the tooling that you've chosen to deploy from both a data protection and cybersecurity perspective, endpoint protection. So there is just general best practices as far as incident response, but really at the end of the day, they're kind of like snowflakes. Like, every company is going to have one that is going to be unique to them, because even within the same vertical, no one's the same. Like, everyone's going to have their own unique ways of doing certain things or tools that you've selected. And even your people are going to be different. Your people are going to have different capabilities and skill sets to bring to bear when things get tough. So,
if you can, just for context, approximately how long does it take to come up with an incident response plan?
Because it is so iterative, it's a little challenging to answer that. But usually, within like a couple of weeks, you can kind of get that first draft that kind of has a general scope and feel of your organization. But again, it really comes back to, you have to practice it to figure out, like, does this really work? And then it's that iteration and iteration and iteration. So it usually takes like 2-3 iterations of tabletop exercises after you've created the initial draft in order for you to get something like, okay, this feels solid. This feels sound. Like, we know that if something happens, we know that we can kind of execute to this plan and get us to a recovered state. People tend to think that cybersecurity is just a technology thing, and it's really not. It's a full business risk management initiative.
Is there one thing that you see leaders get wrong?
The only thing that I can think of where they get wrong is, I think there's leaders who genuinely believe that it could never happen to them. And so with that comes a certain level of arrogance where, you don't prepare. If you think it's impossible, if you don't think that you will ever be a victim, you never properly prepare. And I think that's the closest that I've seen, is that we've seen a couple of organizations that have been hit, and you can just tell, like, they just genuinely thought it would never happen to them. And so some of the precautions that you would normally take were completely circumvented. And I think it came back to just that old concept of, kind of castle and moat. They had a really, really good moat, and they're like, no one's ever going to get across this. And it took one guy with a pole to get across that moat, and the next thing you know, he's in the castle and just wreaking havoc. And I think that's the biggest mistake, is to just honestly believe that it can never happen to you.
So Jeremy, if I'm a CISO right now, what's the best thing I can do for me, for my organization, to make sure that when something happens, I'm prepared?
Find a partner. Like, find a partner out there that provides incident response retainers. There's a lot of organizations out there that do that now, with the big focus being on, don't wait until something happens to call them. Make it a partnership. Make sure that you're working together on maturing your cybersecurity posture, even in the good times, because that's what's going to save you in the bad times. And so having that relationship, having that mutual investment in in your overall cybersecurity maturity. And so that when things hit, they know your environment, they know your plan, they've hopefully practiced it with you, so that when things do go bad, like you've got somebody who's fresh and can add scale to your organization almost instantaneously. So that'd be my one big recommendation is incident response retainers with a trusted partner. And don't just sign up and wait for the bad things to happen. Work with them proactively to make sure that you're all on the same page, so that when that day comes, because it's not if, it's when that day comes, that you've got somebody in the trenches with you that's going to help you get out faster.
Thank you again to Jeremy Nelson, Chief Information Security Officer for Insight North America. For more insights from today's conversation or to learn more about security incident response, visit insight.com/techjournal. This podcast is brought to you by Insight Enterprises, a Fortune 500 solutions integrator. With 16,700 teammates worldwide, Insight helps organizations accelerate their digital journey to modernize their business and maximize the value of technology. We enable secure end-to-end transformation and meet the needs of our clients through a comprehensive portfolio of solutions, far-reaching partnerships, and 35-plus years of broad IT expertise. For more information, visit insight.com.